This is what has been being undermined. This is the liberal approach, and it's what Jonathan Rauch calls liberal science, that process where everybody can raise any idea they want, anybody else can challenge that idea. There's the belief that we can all get at ideas and examine them on their own merits, and that the individual has agency to reject some ideas and uphold others. So this, to the postmodernists, is very, very naive. It's either an extreme naivety and an inability to see the invisible power structures, or it's a selfish attempt to protect one's own privilege. So you see, to some extent, there is, of course, truth in this, because if we look at how our understanding of homosexuality has changed, for example, dominant discourses for a long time said it was a heinous sin. Then it said it was a shameful disorder. Now the dominant discourse around homosexuality is some people are gay, get over it. So this has changed. But whereas the liberals would say this has changed because we were able to look at it, talk about it, discuss it, apply science to it, and really sort of compare arguments for what homosexuality is. Does it have any moral valence at all? And that was how we overcame prejudice against homosexuality. But the discourse theorists, the descendants of the postmodernists, would say this is naive. And what all that has happened is that the ways of talking about things have changed. We are still living in a very heterocentrist and ciscentrist society, and that those power structures are still there and they still need to be dismantled.
And they think that we're going to do that by changing the way that we talk about things.
Yes, precisely. If language creates social reality, changing language can create a better one.
And if you think that, like, if one thinks that we're in this sort of invisible web, this power web, and we're all of us positioned according to our characteristics, we maybe even don't see these things until somebody has taught us the techniques of critical whatever theory. And how can it, like, it sounds like we're trying to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps if you believe that you can change the way that you talk and that would change reality. Like, it is incredibly pessimistic, and I don't know how they think, if you think like that, how they think that you can even change your language.
Well, some theorists have argued that it's almost impossible. Christy Dotson, for example, when she does her conceptualizing epistemic oppression, she says that third level, that one where you have to try to even speak in the language that you have, trying to see that there is a problem when you only have the language, the epistemic resources that you have, is almost impossible. So there is a lot of pessimism there, but there's also a certain simplicity to it, and there's a certain appeal to it, because people feel as though we're only at the beginning. They don't know, not even that the most advanced theorists in the world know exactly how this power system works. But what we're doing is we're picking at it, we're digging at it, we're trying to see it, we're uncovering more bits of it. Because it's unfalsifiable, somebody can identify racism within any interaction, and as long as it's according to the theory, it will be deemed authoritative, it will be correct. So there's a lot of room for people to play with these ideas, for them to interpret things, and to then feel like you're really uncovering new ground and setting the scene for improving things.
Right, so they feel like they're making progress because when there's no falsifiability, everything is sort of progress, every bit of thing that you say.
Yeah, and it's beginning to be able to see it. That's the thing. D'Angelo often says we need to make it visible, and then we can get at it.
I mean, I think the second bit of that doesn't necessarily follow from the first, but since I don't agree with the first either, I think that's kind of irrelevant. I thought it was very interesting the way you talked. I think it was maybe in an article just very recently, you said this thing about what cancel culture really is. There was a great explanation that the point of cancel culture is that if people are saying wrong things and those wrong things are creating wrongness, then silencing them is an extremely moral thing to do. And silencing them by any means, really. And you don't have to debate them. Debating them will be bad. Have I got that about right?
Yes, exactly. I think this makes intuitive sense to humans. I mean, this is why there have been such strong laws against heresy and blasphemy, because the idea is you can corrupt society, you can taint and damn others. So, when we had awful things like the Inquisition, this was a moral endeavor because the attempt was to stop this corruption from spreading and damning a lot of people to hell. And so, yes, they wanted to put very, very strong disincentives in place for people to question the orthodoxy of religion. Now, this is a different situation because we're in a different time, but the same, sorry, my husband has not got his keys. Can you let Daddy in, please?
Shall I ask you the question again? I think you were going really well, so I don't want to. Maybe start from the Inquisition. That was good.
So so we even with things like the Inquisition, which was such a sort of terrorizing thing, there was a moral imperative underneath that. The idea was that if people speak heresy, if they challenge the orthodoxy, the truth of God, this will corrupt and taint the rest of society and cause people to be damned to hell. So there's this incentive to really make to ensure that people are thinking and speaking in the right way for the good of everybody. And that's what you get right now. I mean, the strongest mantra I think that people are expected to repeat at the moment is trans women are women. And so no matter what you actually believe about trans identity, I'm fully in support of trans rights and people identifying as they wish to, with, there's obviously conversations that need to be happen about spaces and sports, but no matter what you think about this, it's difficult to notice that the emphasis is very much on language. Are you saying things which suggest that trans women aren't women? The way to respond to that is not with an argument. So we don't have people arguing back and forwards as much as we have them throwing mantras at each other, as if they're trying to outspeak each other on the level of these discourses. If I say trans women are women often enough, if enough people say it, that will make the social reality be what is needed for the acceptance of trans people.
Yeah, it's interesting because I must say, I had sort of thought that anyone who hung on to a mantra that much couldn't possibly really believe it. That if you feel secure in your own ideas, I'd always thought, but then this just shows that I'm from a previous generation. I always thought if you were secure in your ideas, you wouldn't mind debating them. You'd feel confident that you could answer any criticism that people put forward. But I think what you showed, and you gave me a different way to conceive of this, was that the very saying of these things was a harm. And I hadn't understood that before, that, I was creating an evil, according to these people, by saying things, even possibly if I was saying them on my own in a room. I'm not even meant to think them. I'm not even meant to say them in my head, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, this is why we get the argument that gender critical feminists are involved in the murder of trans women, even though, trans women do seem to be particularly vulnerable to violence, but this isn't, has never been by a gender critical feminist. But there's this idea that they're speaking into a narrative that invalidates, delegitimizes trans people. It creates a hostile environment, and one in which it is acceptable for them to be abused by people who have completely different ideas and aren't feminists at all. So it's
it seems quite remarkable. I mean, I lived in Brazil for several years, and that is one of the places where trans women are murdered. It's actually one of the hotspots of it in Rio de Janeiro, because there's a lot of street workers there.
Yeah,
they're not listening to what gender critical feminists are saying. These men, it's nothing to do with that. It's some mixture of violence, homophobia, to be honest, self-hatred, etc., and just being violent. Is anyone really so convinced if they think it through, or is the point that they're stopping themselves from thinking it through by saying the mantra? Like, is it a thought-stopping cliche?
I think I have a tendency to think that it is actually quite normal, quite intuitive to humans to think that our words have more power than they do. I think that the idea that if we can just get everybody saying the right thing, everything will be okay, actually makes a lot of sense to us. We're a storytelling species. So I think what's more counterintuitive to us is the idea that there can be worth in getting people together who have two different views on a thing and getting them to argue their own side using evidence and a reasoned argument. This doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to a lot of the activists right now, and it hasn't made a lot of sense historically. I think people like you and I and our generation, and people who have been involved in having these kind of conversations, it seems that this is the obvious way. We talk about things, we exchange ideas, this is how we progress, but it doesn't seem to be that intuitive to a lot of people.
Yeah, so maybe it was a brief period, but it was a brief and very glorious period.
I think it's
People
something we
thought,
have to, yeah, we have to hang on to it. We have to constantly reinforce it. Otherwise, we are likely to lose it, and it will be the most powerful narrative wins.
so what, let's see, I want to ask you what you think this means for two particular large areas, very important areas of society that I think are really under attack at the moment. And one is academia and the other one is journalism. So academia seems to have pretty much fallen to these ideas, at least large chunks of it.
I think it's certainly very much overpowered by it. Of course, you get, I don't think the majority of academics hold these views, and you don't find them in every field. They're really sort of concentrated in a cluster in the humanities and also on campus culture. But anybody who goes against them is likely to find themselves in trouble. So this is what I found when I'm studying late medieval women's religious writing. Now I can do work that I can be proud of, as long as I'm not looking at what sex is, what gender is, how it works, in any way that's going to go against the dominant narrative. You know, so if somebody wanted to be a historian and they wanted to look at agriculture or something, they could go through their whole lives without coming cropper with this. But if you're a scientist and you want to look at, say, how sex differences exist between men and women, then you're going to find yourself in trouble.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I think that's a bit of it that people don't see if they're outside what we might call a knowledge producing industry. So I'll count journalism as that, even if it's not very fair. But it's the self-censorship. It's before you even get to the area that's touchy. So it's not about the people who were sacked. It's about the people who never said anything more than anything else.
Yes. I hear it from a lot of academics, and I hear from a lot of people generally who write to me and say, I think I'm the only person in my organization who is concerned about this. And then quite often now I happen to know that they're not, and I can put them in touch with somebody else. And I think there's a lot more people who are concerned about it, or who at least don't agree with it. I think with a lot of liberals on the left who still actually have those kind of beliefs that I'd like them to have about the value of different ideas and the exchange of debate and consistent principles, they tend to understand the social justice approach as a more friendly and liberal thing than it is, and feel that they should be supportive of it and the scholars producing it, because the problem on the right is a more severe one. If you are a leftist, yes, we're going to worry about the rise of right-wing populists, and they then get rather annoyed with people on the left who are saying, yes, but this is a problem that's on the left. It is a problem. We do need to address it.
And more than that, they're connected, aren't they?
I think so.
Yeah. So you tell me about how you think they're connected then.
I don't think, I think there are two ways. If you are a leftist and you want left-wing parties to win and be able to institute left-wing policies, there are two things you have to do. You have to show the problem with the party on the right, and you have to make your own party a strong one and one that people can respect. And I don't think that's happening on the left at the moment. I think that there's this division between the identitarians, the radicals, and the liberals on the left. And at the moment, the identity politics left is the one that is most visible. It's the one that corporations and politicians feel that they have to appease. And I think it's driving people right. Now, I can't know how many people went right because of this. And so it's not very helpful to guess. But I do think that if we could have a more consistently liberal left, then we'd be in a better chance of getting people to vote left again.
So the profession that worries me most, I have to say, because it's the one I'm in, is journalism. And I think you see a lot of the same tendencies, in particular the self-censorship. Not surprisingly, I suppose. I mean, a lot of money has gone out of journalism. A lot of people have gone out of journalism. It's become a low-paid, very temporary and casual sort of work that young people come into, and they have no time, no specialism, no support from older journalists. And of course, they're all graduates now, and most of them have come in from the sorts of courses where they learned this sort of stuff. So I'm absolutely astounded at how fast this has happened, that journalism has been hollowed out. And I also see this as part of the political problem, because ordinary people slowly get the sense that they're not actually reading what's going on. They're reading a sort of a self-censored version of it in what are meant to be the papers of record. So you have your own magazine, you edit a sort of a new magazine. Is this part of the motivation for you, that you see no other place to put the sorts of things that you want to say?
Yeah, and that was why Aereo was created in the first place by Malcolm Marley. He wanted something that wasn't left wing or right wing, but something that would have views from both sides, but would argue them straightforwardly with evidence and reason. And so that is what we try to do. We have quite a lot of leftists who write for us, but few of them are the social justice leftists. They tend to be socialists or social democrats, and we have quite a lot of conservatives as well, and Christians, and they will write from their belief systems. And this, I think, works well. We don't require people to be apolitical, but we do require them to both state what political position they're coming from is, and try to look charitably and concede as much as they can to the one they're criticizing.
Yeah.
So that's...
So, okay, I'm going to take a bit of a leap, a sort of sidestep here, and say how fascinating I find it, endlessly fascinating, the way that race in one bucket, and then what we might say sex, gender, and sexuality in another bucket, how incredibly differently theorized these two things are. So race, which actually is this fluid, blurred sort of category, you know, I mean, the race line was drawn differently in different countries at different times, etc., is regarded as the most rigid possible thing. And sex, gender, sexuality, when, you know, sex is incredibly rigid, sexuality feels for most people quite binary, not everybody, but most. Gender less so, but I mean, compared with race, you know. How did that happen? How did we end up sort of almost the wrong way round there?
Okay, so I think that we've come from different places. So queer theory, which is where a lot of the sort of gender theory and trans activism comes from, that's the most purely postmodern. So it believes that there is a problem with having with knowledge, and that it's been constructed in the service of power. So to get at that, we have to look at the categories through which we think, and to try to blur those boundaries, dismantle those categories, and stop putting people into them. They believe that if we get rid of all categories that aren't, you know, feminine woman attracted to men or masculine man attracted to women, then the world will become a more welcoming place to the people who don't naturally fit into the categories. So we've got that whole fluid thing going on there. And in fact, queer has become a verb. And to queer something is to blur the boundaries and to mix up the categories. So that's one particular theory, and it relies quite a lot on Derrida and Foucault. So when we're going into critical race theory, this comes from a different lineage that has quite a lot of input from the radical New Left. And then it has the postmodern influence on top. So Kimberlé Crenshaw, when she described intersectionality, she described it as contemporary politics, by which she meant the radical activism, linked to postmodern theory, by which she meant the idea of everything being culturally constructed. But she wanted some acceptance of objective truth to be there. She criticized the postmodernists, saying that, you know, we can't just dismantle everything. We have to accept that some things are objectively true, or we can't achieve anything. So those systems of power and privilege had to be seen as true. And I think because this comes from America, and because there really has been that rigid line in America, you know, there has been that one drop rule, where if you are black at all, then you are black. And so the whole sort of identity politics to push back at this has taken this as well as a solid category. They don't think that race is a biological category. They do think it's a social construct, but they think it's been constructed very simply into white supremacy and black subordination.